Well, it's almost Halloween again, so we have to pretend that almost everybody on the planet celebrates this American holiday that's not really tied to anything we've ever done before, and it's just being pushed on our throats like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and CIA black sites. So let's talk about horror games. And the top 7 annoying things about horror games. The things that some developers do in their games meant to instill terror into us all that kinda get a bit annoying. Rating: they've outlived their usefulness, their practicality, and should honestly be forgotten, sent on a long holiday in a place from which they will never return, on a long walk down a short pier or into one of those CIA black sites. That being said, let's get it started with number 7. Jump scares. A jump scare can be good. A jump scare. 1. Remember in Silent Hill when you found that cat in that locker room? That thing was frightening, and it was just a simple cat. It didn't do anything, I think. It may have transformed into a demon later on, I don't remember exactly. Or the dogs from Resident Evil when they first jump through a window. That's something, like that's actually startling, and it makes you feel tense, shocked. What's happening? Why is this? What is going on? But when a game does it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, when the entire game is just jump scares, it sort of becomes annoying. Really, really annoying. It's not horrifying anymore. You can even pinpoint the exact moment it's gonna show up, because a lot of times they will be repetitive to the point where you know there's gonna be a jump scare right in front of you. Now, some games can be smart about this, like they will give you a jump scare, possibly 2, and then they never do one until probably the end of the game. But they sort of get into your head that there's supposed to be another one, and they build upon that, they build that tension, and they keep building and building and building and building, so that when it actually does show up, it is valuable again. But if it happens 5 times in an hour, God no. Number 6. Awkward controls. There are 2 justifications for awkward controls in a horror game. One is quite understandable. A lot of these games were made back when controls were not all that great. Even the forefather of the survival action horror genre was built at an age where 3D was still something new, something not yet fully developed, so it made sense that Alone in the Dark would control kinda horribly. And Resident Evil as well, because 3D controls were not all that great even then, though technically were they really 3D? I mean, yeah, the graphics were 3D, but you didn't move in 3 dimensions most of the time. Technologically, it made absolute sense. They couldn't do better. But when they could do better, they still sort of had controls that were a bit rubbish. The excuse being that this time you can't properly move your character because it's meant to convey a sense of helplessness, a sense of honestly just frustration, because you will often find horror games to be a bit annoying on account of the controls, because you can't jump over things even though you can sometimes, because you can't move fast even though sometimes you can, because you can't turn at the right speed, because you just do not have full control over your character. But instead of doing that, they could hobble your character in a different way that actually does still make sense. With the camera angles, sure, it can still be a bit annoying that you can't properly see a scene, but at least it's made intentionally in a way that makes the moment as dramatic as possible. And it's a lot better than your character being controlled like a tank. Speaking of which, number 5. Taking control away from the player. It wasn't bad enough that some games would hobble your controls, but there's also the problem of you not actually being in control of your character. And it usually happens in scenes where you're just screaming, "Don't do that, don't go in there, stop doing that, don't run away looking behind you and trip, do not fall down that hole, you idiot. Why, oh why did you throw that? Stop doing that, get in there." You know, the moments where you just slam your face into the desk or your controller into your nose because your character does something scripted and stupid when they're not supposed to. When they linger a bit too long looking out a window because they saw something, and then bam, you lose half your life. some items, or you even die because it's an area that you accessed in which your character was made to be killed, but not if you still had control over them and ran away or shot the enemy or did anything. Granted, sometimes your character will do things like punch a giant boulder with their fists of absolute steel, and I'm not sure if that's actually better when it comes to being a horror game, because that would sort of feed the fact that you're helpless or powerless or somehow threatened by the things around you. Number 4. Repetitive combat encounters. Some horror games, well, the survival horror genre, has an over-reliance sometimes on combat encounters that are a bit repetitive. And the game that really sticks out in my mind in this aspect is Dead Space 2. Now, some people call it the best of its console generation, but for me it's the game where, oh, this corridor leads to a dead end. Gee, I wonder if this is where the 15th combat encounter that's the same place is gonna happen, with wave after wave of enemies that don't really do anything for me anymore. I've killed 100,000 of them. I've got weapons made to blast apart planets. It's getting tedious now. Annoying. Could I at least fight them while moving? Oh, now I fight them on an elevator, which is moving, but I'm still standing still. Yeah, that's a big difference. And by that I mean that it's not really a big difference. If you're gonna have combat in a horror game, make it valuable, make it tense, make it horrifying. Make something like Alien Isolation, where the thought of having to fight that xenomorph with a flamethrower, you do have a flamethrower, but the thought of it still kind of creeps you the hell out. Or like how in Resident Evil you would occasionally be assaulted by a creature, an entity that's immortal. Well, to be fair, Dead Space 2 also had that near the end, and that bit was actually good. Like being chased by that thing, that was nice. That was tense because you couldn't kill it. It was one of the 2 good horror scenes in that game. Nah, I'm just kidding. It was one of the only 2 horror scenes in that game. Number 3. Save systems. I get the reasoning of limiting save games, because if you can save anytime, then where's the tension? Where's the exhilaration? Where's the fear, the actual terror that if you die, you're gonna be dead. You're gonna lose all the progress. You're gonna have to go back to the last save point and redo all the steps you did to get here, or you may die again and then go back and have to do everything again and again. And it gets boring and not tense and not horrifying. It just gets annoying. I've done this 5 times already. Can I just get through it? Can I save before this bit so I can not have to rethread all my steps up until here? Though to be fair, at least horror games are not as strict as they used to be, because remember Resident Evil, you couldn't actually save how many times you wanted to. You had to find those ink ribbons, which were limited. They were finite. And you also, well, I can't really criticize Silent Hill because I have no idea what save system it had, since the PC version of Silent Hill 1 was emulated really well and you could save anytime, which is why I really enjoyed it. It was still horrifying though, because here's the idea. A good horror game, even when you save, will still make you feel scared as all hell, because it's not the thought that you may lose your progress that makes you feel afraid. It's the environment itself, it's the scene, it's the thing that's out to get you, that may be lurking in any shadow, that may be right behind you at this exact point. Which leads us to number 2, fake tense moments. Horror games tend to have a bit of a problem when it comes to replayability. The second time around, they're not as scary because the mysticism, the magic is just gone. The tricks have been revealed, and it turned out the Emperor had no clothes. This is because some of them rely on fake tense moments. A good example of this would be Outlast, when at the beginning you're being chased around by some fat guy and you hide in a locker. No matter which locker you choose, the fat guy will always check the other locker. He never has any chance of actually finding you. There is no way he can get you. It's all fake, it's all smoke and mirrors. happens. And when you realize that, all the tension goes away. It's all fake, that there is no threat. Contrast this to what Alien Isolation does. That alien can find you if you're hiding in a locker and make noise, or it just finds you there because you've been standing inside it for too long. It doesn't pull any punches. It's not going to hold your hand. It's gonna outright kill you repeatedly because it's an actual monster hunting you down. There's very little fakeness, well, apart from some scenes where it's a bit scripted, but there's very little fakeness in it. So that game will always be tense, it'll always be frightening, it'll always be exhilarating. Whereas something like Outlast just teeters off the moment you realize that you're not meant to be found, you're not meant to lose. That really takes all the fun out of it, which is very annoying. But not as annoying as number 1, equating grotesque with horror. This is probably the most annoying thing from my point of view that is associated with horror video games. Some developers believe that having a creature in the game or multiple ones that look horrifying, that look like they were a combination of a Shar-Pei that had an accident with a blender and bits of bones from a dinosaur, a bunch of tentacles, disproportioned organs, usually eyes, and probably a couple of buckets of blood is enough to be a horror game. It's not. That creature in itself may look spooky, may look grotesque, may look vomit-inducing, but you get used to it. Especially if it's shown to you from the start, if it's jammed right into your face, if it's overused, if it's just not treated as a horror element. Horror is independent from the grotesque. Horror movies, for example, a lot of good ones, are about people. No monsters, just really screwed up people that don't have special powers, don't look like monsters. And good games, good horror games, can make you absolutely terrified even before the monster actually shows up. It's enough to allude to the existence of one. It's enough to induce the right state of mind that you are being followed, you are being hunted. You are not alone. There's something else dwelling in the shadows, breathing down your neck, waiting for one moment when you trip up and then it'll eat you alive. Which is what the titles made by frictional games tend to do. They don't show you the monster, they allude to it. And also Alien Isolation does the same. Yeah, it does show the alien from time to time, but it's not always full front and center. It is not put directly in confrontation with you, because if it does, you're dead. You see it dragging its tail around, you see its legs, you see it in shadows, in silhouette, you hear it hiss. It builds up to it. Now let's face it, it could have been something that's not even a monster. It could just have been a psycho, a murderer out to get you. And it would have still been just as scary, because the way the scene is made functions with any kind of threat. It's not enough to have a grotesque looking creature saying booga booga right in your face or screaming at you in an elevator, even though right before it was just silently standing still, menacingly opening its eyes and glowing at you. Yeah, I'm referring to Dead Space 2 and the elevator scene, which started out completely horrifying, and then when the screaming started, it was just a comedy, much like the rest of the game. So ends this show dedicated to the most annoying things in video games related to horror. Please inform me in your comments about what I got wrong, what is actually not annoying, but more importantly, what you find annoying in horror games that when removed would actually improve the games and make them more terrifying. Goodbye.